Brilliant. Well, it's wonderful to be with you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along and for finding a different venue, I think, to where you normally are. So it's really good to be here. It's lovely for me, actually, to be able to spend some time with Ness and Rich. I've known them, we were trying to think earlier, probably over 25 years. How crazy is that? Longer than some of your lives. That's mad, can I say that? So we've known each other for a long, long time, but don't often actually get to see each other because we live kind of different parts of the country. So it's a treat to be able to come up and spend some time with them, and a treat to be able to spend some time with you as a church and to join in your life as a church for just this little short while. So thank you very much for welcoming me in and for opening up your ears and your hearts and your minds for this afternoon. We haven't had any, let me say a bit about myself. I'm just trying to think, we haven't had any intro, have we? So let me explain who I am. I come from, or I live down in the south of England, down in Chichester. Oh, there was a little, oh, I like that. Where are you from? Oh, fabulous. Yes, yeah, fabulous. Well, I've got a friend. That's nice to know. And I am a director for a charity called Tearfund that some of you may have heard of. And we're a Christian relief and development and advocacy organisation. We work in about 50 countries around the world, work in some of the poorest communities in the world, getting alongside the local church to equip and to motivate and to help the local church respond to the issues of poverty that are there. So we do a whole range of really practical, on-the-ground stuff to do with water and sanitation and food and health and some of those basic things. And then my role involves overseeing the advocacy work that we do. So that's campaigning to governments and businesses and trying to get them to do the right thing, and also working with our communities to help them to raise their voices and equip them so that it's not just all about us doing it, but it's empowering others to be able to speak to their governments and local authorities to speak up about the issues that impact them and that are causing poverty. And I also oversee the theology, the kind of biblical stuff that comes out from Tearfund as well, and a whole range of other things too. So I love being a part of Tearfund. They're a brilliant organisation. It is a genuine privilege to be working with them. And we are here thinking about environmental justice. And you may not have realised it, but we've already been thinking about environmental justice through your mission statement and through some of the songs that we've been singing, and both through your mission statement and through the songs, you have been dreaming. We have been dreaming of a vision. We've been having a vision of a better world, a world where there is hope and love and justice. We've been dreaming and envisioning around a world where heaven, we are disciples and making disciples, and together grabbing handfuls of heaven and bringing it down to earth now. And as we think around this theme of environmental justice, I want to give you permission to dream and to have a vision as to what kind of world do you want? What sort of world do you want to live for? What kind of world do you want to act in order to get to? And I want to ask you just to take a few minutes to turn to the person next to you to think about what would that actually look like if we lived in a world where heaven had come to earth. What would it look like? I don't just mean in terms of the big things like we'd see an end to global hunger and there'd be no more climate change. But what would it look like? What would you be doing? What would your street look like? What would your university campus look like? What would your church look like? What would your community look like? What would be happening? What would the people be doing? What would you see around you? Take a bit of time with the person next to you to think about that. What would it look like, really practically? Great. Ooh, you're going to have to... I did say I'm going to give... Where do you want me to hold this? Because it seems... Okay. Are you sure? I'll give you a moment to... Okay, fabulous. Right, what kind of things have you been saying? Would love to hear from you. Sorry? Lots of shared resources. Yes, a real communal and community type living, moving away from our society where we're very focused on individualism and getting what we need for ourselves and holding on to it. And we all have to have our own individual things, but much more sharing and being a community together around our streets and our neighborhoods. Yeah, lovely. An equal and shared standard of living for all. Yeah, that's something that is part of one of Tearfund's vision, is that inequality is kept to acceptable limits. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So a unity of work, a shared vision around inequality, around there not being inequality, and that community side. Yep, thank you. What other things have you talked about? What might it look like? No litter. Yeah, we'd be living in beautiful places that were clean. There'd be no litter, one, because we would all naturally not throw things away, but also because we would have a society where things to be thrown away weren't produced in the first place. So rather than having a system that's very linear, where we buy things, we use things, and then we throw them away, we would be in a circular economy where everything would be reused. So there would be no waste, and therefore no litter. Anything else? Sorry? Don't have to lock your front door. Yes, because there's peace. And you only have to lock your front door because some people have more than others, don't they? And it's that inequality that leads to us having to lock our front doors. If we're living very differently, there's not the inequality. We're sharing much more communally, then we wouldn't need to lock our front doors. Lots of greenery, yes. Picking up on the idea of not having litter. A beautiful place. Someone this morning, when I asked this question, said that one of the younger people said we would all be living in trees. And I thought that was wonderful. We might not all be living in trees, but we might be living in houses that have the natural world integrated into them. And you may be doing courses that actually tie into a lot of the things that we've just been talking about. And we need people doing engineering, structural design, architecture. whatever it is, economics, politics, we need Christians, creative Christians in all of these spheres. And this is all a part of environmental justice and is what we're thinking about this afternoon. How do we bring heaven to earth, that real tangible, physical, dare I say, heaven to earth? And I want us to think about it in 4 different ways as to why we are looking at environmental justice this afternoon. The first reason is for the sake of the earth. The kind of things that you've been talking about, and those green spaces and beautiful spaces and living in trees and lovely houses, that really speaks to an interconnectedness between ourselves and the wider natural world. We live in a beautiful world. I wonder how often you get out and appreciate that. We live in a stunning world. We live in a world that God created and looked at and said, it's very good. God looked at the world that he made and said, it's fantastic. I love it. Look at what I've made. We live in a world of beauty, a world of abundance, of fertility, a world that represents a generous God. Do you know, God could have made a world that was grey and where everything was the same. He could have created us just to eat a grey wafer that hung off every tree in the world. He didn't. He made and placed us in an incredibly, extraordinarily beautiful, colourful, diverse world. That's the vision that we're looking towards. Genesis 1 talks about it in terms of teeming. God created a world that was teeming with life, absolutely rich and full. And yet, sadly, that is quite different from many aspects of our world today. I know that I don't need to go through with you all of the different problems that our world faces. I sometimes teach on a master's course on environmental ethics, and I start by asking the students to get into pairs and to list out all of the environmental problems that they can think of. And then we go round pair by pair and they say one, and then when we've got round everyone, we start again. And we go round and round until we've got to the end of every list, until we've got to the end of the list. It's a long list, and I'm not going to go through it all with you now. But I've just put this up as some examples of the way that the creation is groaning and suffering. Climate change, of course, is the biggest issue that we are facing, which is devastating ecosystems as temperatures change and the ecosystems, the way that they work, are broken, and so creatures can't rely on the food that they would normally have been able to source, and so numbers are crashing. We're facing biodiversity loss at an alarming rate, due partly to climate change, but also due to our human activities, through the way we're treating the land and the soil, the way we're treating the air through pollution, the way we're treating the seas through overfishing. And we're facing a plastic pollution crisis that is hitting us too, which, as we know, is devastating marine environments. We have a creation that is in crisis. And so for the sake of our world, for the sake of all these amazing creatures that God has made, for the sake of the beauty and the diversity of this world, we are thinking about environmental justice today. And also for the sake of people living in poverty. At Tearfund, we hear every day the devastating impact that the climate crisis is having on people living in poverty. I've been speaking about the climate crisis for nearly 30 years now, and I have realised that my communication on it needs to change. For one, the language has changed. It was global warming, and then it was climate change, and now we're talking about a climate crisis and a climate emergency. And for two, I know that I have had to shift from talking in terms of predictions to talking in terms of reality. So for many years, for decades, I talked about predictions. If we don't act, this is what is going to happen. And it was with a sickening thud one morning as I was looking through at Tearfund. I get a roundup of the papers each day that's sent to me. It was a sickening thud one morning when I was looking at that roundup and looked at all the headlines of what was there, and I realized, oh my goodness, this is all the things that I and many scientists have been predicting for years. They are happening. We are in a climate crisis. I have a feeling, I don't need to tell you this, you are very well aware of that, and that's something that you are growing up with and grappling with as you look towards the future. What is the impact of that on you? What does it mean for you? What are the implications of that for you? And for people living in poverty, they have actually been living in a climate crisis for some years now. Through increased drought, through increased weather events, extreme weather events, through flooding, through people losing their homes, not able to grow their crops, children not able to go to school. We're seeing in the communities most affected that then it leads to increasing rates of child marriage because of poverty and increasing rates of domestic violence because of the poverty. So climate crisis, the issues of climate are interlinked with so many different issues. And this is about justice, which is where looking today at environmental justice is so important. An average person in the UK will consume in about 6 days the amount of resources that a person in Malawi will consume in a year. And yet it's the person in Malawi who now is feeling the brunt of the pain. So for the sake of people living in poverty, we need to be thinking about environmental justice, because the things are so linked. You can't care for people without thinking about the land they live on, the seas they fish in, the air they breathe. And that's the same in the UK as well as globally. Environmental issues always hit the poorest people the most. So for the sake of our world, for the sake of people living in poverty, thirdly, for our own sake, because we are intimately and intricately connected with the wider natural world. It's not the case that you've got people over here and then the environment over there. It's not even the case in Christian language that you've got people over here and then creation over there, as if somehow we're not part of creation. We are a part of the world that God has made. We are part of the ecosystems. We need a healthy planet, very obviously, for our physical needs. But we also need a healthy planet for our emotional needs and for well-being. We know that our well-being increases when we get outside and spend time outside. I'm sure you all rediscovered that or discovered that during the pandemic with those daily walks and getting outside, hearing the birds and so on. That's actually very biblical. We are created as Adam. And Adam is a play on words. It's kind of like a pun that the Hebrew writer is giving. The Hebrew for ground or for earth is Adamah. So we are created as Adams from the Adamah. We are earthy ones. We are earth creatures. We're not floaty angelic beings up there somewhere. We are created from the dust, from the clay, from the soil. And therefore, our emotional well-being is totally caught up with the well-being of the planet and with our connection with the wider world. There's a writer called Richard Louv who has talked about nature deficit disorder. And many of us are struggling and suffering from that because we don't get outside enough. And there are so many studies with school children, with patients recovering from an operation, with inmates in prison, all showing that contact with the natural world improves recovery time, improves behavior, and so on. So let's get out there. Let's get out and get our fingers dirty. Did you know there are microbes in the soil that when they come into contact with our skin, they release endorphins and the happy hormones inside of us. It's a physical, biological thing. We are created to be connected to the world. So for our own sakes, we're thinking around environmental justice. So get outside, have a look at the birds, listen to the birds, notice the flowers that are around. If you're walking past a bush with flowers on, stop and smell. I always do that. It's a little thing I always do. You might look a bit odd. Well, who cares? You're connecting. You are being Adam, connected to the Adamah. And then fourthly, undergirding all of this, we are thinking about environmental justice for God's sake, because this goes right to the heart of what we see in the scriptures. If we can go on to the next slide, some really basic points here, some of which I've touched on already, that God made this world and he loves it. I don't know if you've been brought up with a kind of Christian thinking that says there's something a bit tainted about this world. Actually, as a Christian, my focus should be on evangelism and reading the Bible and praying and worshipping. And it's not quite Christian to be involved in things like that. And my destiny is up on a floaty heaven somewhere. That is not biblical. Matter matters to God. God made this world. And Colossians tells us, or Paul tells us in Colossians, that this world was made by Jesus. It's not only an Old Testament thing. This world was made by Jesus and for Jesus and through Jesus, almost as if this world was a present from the Father to the Son. If that's the case, don't you want to take care of and value something which is so precious to Jesus? So God made this world and he loves it. And he created us as the final species, that Adam, that earth creature. He created us to take care of the rest of what was made, to be made in his image, God's representatives here on earth, carrying out his will and his servant rule in this world. The world, of course, has gone wrong because of us. We don't need to go into that. But interestingly, that's something that the Old Testament particularly picks up on and highlights the link between a lack of righteousness and the state of the land. And then the good news is that we are called to be a part of God's plans for salvation, for reconciliation of all things, people, but not only people. All things. And God has a future for his creation. And he calls us and asks us to be a part of that future and to live our lives today with that vision in our minds that we just started with briefly, that vision of what would it look like, or what will it look like when heaven comes to earth, when there will be no more mourning or suffering or sickness. Beautiful picture in Revelation 21 and 22. A very physical, heavenly picture where you've got God dwelling in the midst of the people, but there's a river and there are trees with leaves. It's a beautiful picture. Our calling is to play our part in working towards that future. So how do we do that? We know where we want to get to. We get glimpses of that vision of the future of what our world could look like when heaven comes to earth. But we also know that sadly today we are far from that. There's a big gap that we stand in. And we are called to take action. We are called to give, to act, and pray. Let's give. I want to encourage you to be generous with your money. That might seem hard as a student. I know not all of you here are students, but that might seem hard for you. But it's an important part of our Christian discipleship. I can remember my dad, when I was young, and starting to get pocket money, saying to me, encouraging me to give 10%, and saying, Ruth, if you can give 10% when it's just a small amount, then that will get a habit going in your life, and you will then always be able to give a proportion of your money, however much you earn. So whatever you have, it's a really good discipline. It doesn't have to be 10%, but it's a really good habit, Christian habit, to be using some of the money that you have to bless others and to go towards the work of restoring the natural world and responding to the climate crisis. So think about what you do with your money. Secondly, we can act. And we can act in two ways. Firstly, by thinking about all the different individual things that we can do in our lives. If we can get, thank you. So for particular areas where we can make a difference, we can think about the food that we eat. And it was great hearing about some of the things that you're already doing, right, when we started off. And whoever, I think it might have been you who said you're eating less meat. And thinking about the difference that we can make through our dietary choices. Think about the food that we eat. Thinking about the way we get around, our travel, the energy that we use, and the things that we throw away, particularly, of course, plastic, and taking steps to move away from single-use plastic. There's lots of other things as well. We could talk about our use of technology, we could talk about clothing and so on, but those are 4 areas where we can really make a difference. So we can act by taking steps to reduce the amount of resources that we use and consuming less and consuming in ways that are gentle on this earth. And then we can act really importantly by holding our governments and our businesses to account. And alongside the individual lifestyle stuff, we need also to be focusing on those big systemic changes. So we have got to call our governments to account. We have got to tell them that we want them to take the climate crisis seriously, and we want them to act. They have committed to the Paris Agreement. They now need to put those promises into place. One of the things particularly that has been promised since 2009 is around climate finance for the world's poorest countries. We are still waiting for that promise to be delivered. And so at Tearfund, we have just launched this new campaign called Time to Deliver, and would love you to go on to follow the link, to have a look at that and just add your signature, add your voice and say, yes, we need to deliver on the promises that we made right back in 2009 that we still haven't delivered on. So we can act, and all of us can play a part in that by joining things like Tearfund and the climate campaigns that we do, getting out onto the streets, writing to your MP, writing to the government. We have a voice, and that voice is really precious, so let's use it. So we can give, we can act, and finally, we can pray. And I want to finish on this because I believe prayer is a really important part of how we take action and how we respond, and that prayer needs to undergird everything that we do. I believe that prayer changes things. I believe that God acts when we call on him. And my goodness, when we look at the world today, forgive me, we're in a bloody mess, aren't we? Do you know, there is no other way of putting it. We really are. We are in a huge mess, and we need God to act. And the scriptures promise us that where the people repent, where they turn from their ways, and when they call on the Lord will hear them, and he will heal their land. And that's what we need. We need God to heal our land. And there's so much we can do, but ultimately we need God to move. So let's pray. And one of the big areas we can pray for is the climate. And you can see up there, take a picture of it, do it now, get your phones out. We've got, I don't know how many thousands of people are joining with us to pray for the climate, and you'll get messages and you'll get really informed prayer points so that we can pray together to see things change. So let's stand in the gap between where we are now and the hope and the vision of where we want to get to. Let's give and let's act and let's pray. We're going to take some time in a moment, just a bit of time to chat about some of that and to think, what's your takeaway going to be? What are you going to go away and take some action on? Before we do that, let me just tell you about some of the resources that I've brought that are up out on the table out there. So a few books to help you think about this a bit more and take it a bit further. One is called Just Living, Faith and Community in an Age of Consumerism. And this is exploring and asking ourselves, how can we follow Jesus in a consumer society? All of us here are absolutely children of the consumer age, and we probably don't even realize how much so, because it is just the air that we breathe. We are all children of consumerism. And that's not always problematic, but sometimes it is. And so how can we be formed in the likeness of Christ when we're being brought up to be conformed in the likeness of consumerism? So Just Living explores that. Then L is for Lifestyle, Christian Living That Doesn't Cost the Earth, is a really practical book. So if you want to go away and think, okay, what can I do to make a difference? This will help you. It goes through the alphabet. It takes an issue for each letter. So B is for bananas and looks at global trade. And I won't go through the whole alphabet. You'll have to have a look. Each chapter is very short. It's sometimes what I call a toilet book. You could have it in the toilet and you might get through a chapter in a sitting, just depending on what a sitting is like for you. And each chapter finishes with 2 or 3 very clear action points, so you can actually go away and do something about it. So that's really practical with lots of information in it. Then if you want a good, deep read around what the Bible says and some spirituality and contemporary science and a whole range of things, Saying Yes to Life was the Archbishop of Canterbury's Lent book, and it uses Genesis 1 and those 6 days of creation kind of as a springboard to explore a whole range of different things. So if you want something that you can really delve into and explore a lot of the biblical stuff that I've only just touched on so briefly, then that is there for you. And then finally, if you have children or nieces or nephews or a friend who's a children's worker, then this will be for you. Planet Protectors, 52 Ways to Look After God's World, is for primary school-aged kids. And I co-wrote it with a chap called Paul Carenza, who's a comedian and BBC scriptwriter, and is just brilliant. So it's fun and quirky and got lots of illustrations and so on. So those are on the table out the back. There's a bit of a special offer if you get all 4. Any profit goes to Tearfund, so I don't take any money from it. But they are there to resource you and to help you take further what we've only just been able to touch on so briefly in this time together. But let me just remind you where we finished off. Let's give, let's act, and let's pray. Okay, I'm going to ask you to turn to the person next to you. What is your takeaway from today? Is there one thing that you could do? Maybe it's something you've been thinking of for ages, but have never really quite got round to doing it. What one thing could you do from today?